Hello, this is Impact. I'm Yalda Hakim. Protesters Bongbong Marcos, the son of the late dictator Ferdinand Marcos, looks set to be named the next president. That's all coming up here on Impact. In the past month, the country has been gripped by escalating demonstrations over soaring prices and power cuts. On Monday, thousands besieged the Prime Minister's official residence, leading to his evacuation in a pre-dawn operation. Mahinda Rajapaksa had resigned hours earlier.
And setting fire to vehicles and businesses belonging to members of the ruling party. This is what remains of a house owned by a cabinet minister. Several people have been killed, including an opposition MP, quelled the violence. Demonstrators tried to storm the Prime Minister's official residence when he was inside the building. A curfew across the island has now been extended.
Supporters of the governing party, they attacked some of these, some of these peaceful protesters here. That triggered violence across the country. Now, that violence also it is giving a very defiance message by these protesters now struggling to repay money. That is resulting in shortage of foreign exchange reserves. That means they cannot import fuel and food, and that's why these people are on the streets.
And Rasan, in the last 48 hours, though, we have seen Mahinda Rajapaksa, who has been...
And two other brothers were in the cabinet. So the people think the Rajapaksa brothers should go all together, and there should be a new political culture, new political system reflecting the wishes of the people here. Now, Mahinda Rajapaksa has gone, but still...
Demonstration for Sri Lanka's economic crisis, which has led to acute shortages of staple food, fuel and power. Earlier, I spoke to Amalini De Saira from Watchdog Sri Lanka, who have been tracking protests and talking to protesters. Sri Lanka
in this country is the economic crisis, the shortage of fuel, of gas to cook, of food as well, that is resultant also of this government's policies. And years, for example, we have farmers all over the country asking this government for accountability for a disastrous policy that they put in place last year to ban the use of chemical fertilizers that saw devastating impacts across the
political class, this family, or do people have faith that if President Gotabaya steps down, Rajapaksa, and if there is change, things will also change?
I think
the struggles of the farmers and the impact on their livelihoods. But in general, on a day-to-day basis, just talk our audience through how difficult life has become because of this economic crisis for all.
Something that we've been seeing across the country for a few months now, where people are waiting in queues for sometimes the entire day just to get a canister of fuel for their vehicle or to fill their tank up or to get a cylinder. You were literally in the dark for 13 hours a day, unable, and corresponding losses of signal, so you were not able to do work for those who were working from home. As a result of the agricultural crisis as well, there has been a shortage of food, and that has corresponded.
Talking to me a little earlier. Now stay with us here on Impact. Still to come, Prince Charles takes his mother's place at one of the most important ceremonial events of the year in London as Queen Elizabeth pulls out of the state opening of Parliament on doctor's advice.
Mustard oil has always followed in nature's footsteps, extracting mustard oil using completely natural methods, focusing only on purity and quality, and leaving the rest to nature. Because when we live in harmony with nature, life can be great.
The mustard specialist.
Attack by Russia, and that more than 1,000 Ukrainian soldiers remain at the site. Russia has made small gains in Donbass in the east, but at a heavy cost. And in the north, the Ukrainians have been counterattacking. Our chief international correspondent Lise Doucette is in Dnipro.
were expected on major cities as Russia marked its Victory Day. In the end, it was the port city of Odessa which took the biggest hits. Missiles struck the southern port city during the day, forcing the visiting European official, Charles Michel, to take as well as a depot in the port itself, an absolutely crucial port for Ukraine, its biggest port on the Black Sea, where it exports its agricultural products, including corn, grain and wheat. Our correspondent Caroline Davies reports.
Completely folded. There are still fires that the fire brigade here are trying to put out, and the electricity wires over on this side have been ripped away. Russia has been targeting the port city of Odessa on Ukraine's southern coast. It's strategically important. Before the
and over time, the situation can become frankly terrible. Politicians are already discussing the possible consequences of price crisis and famine in Africa and Asia. This is a direct consequence.
With them, I didn't want her to hear the sound of the explosion and be frightened by it. The whole house was shaking. Then she asks her daughter, "What do we do when we hear the air raid siren?" We run, she says. We run away.
The attacks that Russia has been unleashing across Ukraine. Last week, however, cruise missiles slammed into the center of this city. So I went to meet the regional head of the Dnipro Council, Mykola Lukashuk, to ask him.
More than 8 years. And today the best military servicemen are in Donetsk region. These military servicemen have been fighting the war for 8 years. And taking into account this fact, I believe in our military servicemen. Especially in the first days of the war, deputies and almost all of the mayors of our region received tax from Russian military men, which aimed to break any resistance. They said something like, "You were elected by the people, take the control into your hands and surrender." Who received the tax, sent the Russian far away and united even more to defend our region. Some people speak in Russian, some in Ukrainian, but we all say that we believe in our victory and everything will be Ukraine. It was somewhere around the 15th day of the war. After that, I sent my family somewhere safer, though my wife didn't want to leave. But I told her that we have 3 children and someone has to take care of them.
The next point that they want to focus on. Most of the heat, of course, during the course of this conflict has been in the east of the country. And here in Odessa, we are several hours' drive away from the front line, which is currently just to the south of another port city called Mykolaiv. For a few weeks or so, we have seen more of these missile strikes on a regular basis, often hitting infrastructure targets like the airport, but also hitting residential targets too. And of course, it was about just over 2 weeks ago when it was the residential block of flats that was hit.
Thank you very much for joining us from Odessa, the unrelenting attacks against Odessa. But of course, it is in the Donbass in eastern Ukraine where Russia has concentrated its fighting forces and its firepower. Unrelenting attacks there. Streets and entire towns coming under ferocious bombardment. Now there is the bombing of the highways leading out, what local officials call the salvation highways, meaning that people are trapped in their homes uneven to
Rising against his dictatorial father started in 1986. Back then, the Marcos family were ousted from the presidential palace. But more than 30 years on, they look set to return. Machine failures were then followed by rapid election results.
I know it's not easy for you to accept the numbers that come up in the quick count. Not only regret, but clear frustration is what our ranks.
For utmost, we voted, we lined up, we did our due diligence, but COMELEC, the institution mandated to hold swift and free and fair elections, they did not do their end of the job, which is why we have to hold them accountable.
In the new session of the British Parliament, and for the first time read the Queen's speech on her behalf. It's after the Queen had to pull out because of mobility problems. Here's our political correspondent, Damien Grammaticus.
The traditions of this day date back to the 1500s. But this year, there was no gilded carriage bearing the Queen. Instead, a royal motorcade bringing the Prince of Wales, accompanying imperial state crown, and today the Prince of Wales entered the House of Lords. The sovereign's throne had been removed. Instead, the slightly lower consort's throne was placed there for Prince Charles.
And help ease the cost of living for families. Her Majesty's government will level up opportunity in all parts of the country and support more people into work.
To do that, the government says it'll use law currently based on European conventions to crack down on Extinction Rebellion type protesters and ban some types of conversion therapy. So for all the government's other plans outlined today, pressure is growing for it to bring in more immediate measures to deal with the growing inflationary pressure.
In Pakistan could reach 50 degrees on a number of the days later this week. Meanwhile, the satellite picture shows severe cyclonic storm Asani. The cloud is all off-centre. The centre of circulation is still actually quite a way out to sea. But the storm is working in a westward direction. Of days we'll see those temperatures reach 50, perhaps peaking at around 51 degrees Celsius. This is extreme heat. It's very dangerous as well, and it's going to last. That heat still with us even into the weekend before those temperatures drop and the temperatures hit the 50-degree mark.
से आज तक LIC हर पल आपके साथ.
The Context with Christian Fraser on BBC World News.
A new way of earning a living is emerging in the online world, one in which work and play are one and the same. Could this be our future?
Still fighting to rebuild its electricity grid. Fossil-fueled corporate interests say they should do the job, but local leaders here say the sun is the best way to bring power to the people. Join me, Samir Hussain, on BBC World News.
This is BBC World News. I'm Yalda Hakim. The headlines. Anti-government protests in Sri Lanka are continuing. The government killed at least 7 people. A nationwide curfew is in place. Authorities in the southern Ukrainian city of Odessa say aircraft dropped 7 missiles on a shopping centre and a warehouse. President Zelensky is warning Russia's naval blockade is disrupting.
On BBC World News, the latest business news from across the globe. World Business Report.
Hello to you, this is World Business Report. I'm Ben Thompson and we're starting this hour in Ukraine, where the key economy is set to contract by nearly a third this year in the wake of Russia's invasion. That, according to the European Bank for Reconstruction. Meanwhile, the report does predict that Russia's economy will shrink by 10% and post zero growth next year. So let's get some detail with Beata Jaworczyk, who's chief economist at the EBRD, and she joins us now. Thank you for being with us.
Electricity consumption, which is a good indicator of what's happening in the economy, is down by 40%. Between a third and a half of firms stopped operating. And on top of that, at 1/10 of the UK income. Now, with the massive destruction of building and other infrastructure, Ukraine will emerge from this war much poorer than before.
And how, I suppose it's very early days for us to start talking.
The war erupted when post-pandemic recovery was taking off in the regions around Ukraine, in the broadly defined European neighborhood. And the war worsened economic outlook for all. And if we assume a more pessimistic scenario with disruption of gas supplies from Russia to Europe, then we would have a situation where all the post-COVID recovery gains would be wiped
in mind that Russians as consumers are big consumers around the world, and so once again there is an overspill effect, isn't there, that if they're not able to travel or consume, that not only affects the Russian economy but those right around the world.
Absolutely. Tourists and their spending in Cyprus accounts for more than 1.8% of GDP. They are also important for tourism flows and income in countries such as the Baltic republics.
Tough reading right now. Beata Jaworczyk there from the EBRD. Thank you. Now let's turn our attention to financial markets, because there are some signs of recovery today after a huge sell-off in the United States and Asia. On Monday, it saw that lots of businesses that make up these indexes are worried about where their customers will be able to come from and whether they'll be able to buy what they're selling.
Absolutely, and that's why I think you're seeing so much pressure on, these consumer-forward kinds of companies. Is inflation, so the really high cost of living. So not only are you not able to borrow money cheaply, whether it be for a car loan or for credit cards, but also anything that you're trying to get is going to be a lot more expensive.
Samira, more from Samira a little later, but for now, thanks very much. And we're going to turn our attention now to Sri Lanka, because after more than a month of violent protests, the country's Prime Minister, Mahinda Rajapaksa, has decided to step down. Protests have taken place across
that is ongoing right now, and finding an answer to that economic crisis is the priority as of now. We know that the second set of technical discussions with the International Monetary Fund has begun, and there are also discussions with the World Bank that are happening. Mahinda Rajapaksa, the outgoing Prime Minister, not in his seat, the cabinet being dissolved, there is nobody at the helm of affairs as far as the fiscal measures are concerned. So who takes those decisions? At this point in time, there is a that the President Gotabaya Rajapaksa must also resign from its seats. That has been one of the demands of the protesters as well. So which way that is headed, and will that lead to some recovery plan on the economy side, is a big uncertain bit right now.
Archana Shukla there, our correspondent in Colombo, with the latest. Now, amid all of that uncertainty and rather depressing news, let me leave you with news of this. An iconic painting by Marilyn Monroe by Andy Warhol has been auctioned for $190.
सजाते हैं मुश्किलें कोई हरदम साथ निभाते हैं कल आज और कल में रहते हैं देश के हर पल में
forefront of a new generation of progressive choreographers who are drawing new audiences to contemporary dance.
It is just extraordinary. Whatever their method, they only had one chance to get that right.
Inspire. This is BBC World News with the latest news and results from around the globe. Sport today.
EA delivers another gripping playoff match. Grand Slams galore in the latest round of MLB games. Ohtani with that crunching hit in California. Fourth quarter showdown, neck and neck, as Giannis Antetokounmpo gave the hosts a 2-point lead. Once again, the Greek freak was brilliant and led the way for Milwaukee. 34 points for him, but Boston weren't done. Again, 32 points. Two crucial free throws late on in that one. The Warriors are now a win away from making the conference finals for the 6th time in the last 8 seasons. Now, Shohei Ohtani had a night. It was his second homer of the game as well, to help Los Angeles Angels beat the Tampa Bay Rays 11-3. Big win. They now lead the American League West standings. Another grand slam in the game with a serious leg injury, but he turned the game around. What a night. 8-2 down going into the 9th. He tied the scores, then won the game in the 11th with a 3-run homer. The Guardians running out 12-9 winner. And cricket fans worldwide. He is seriously ill in hospital. He stepped down as England's batting coach in February following their Ashes defeat in Australia, had recently taken up the role of head coach with Afghanistan, played 100 tests for England, seriously ill and currently in hospital receiving treatment. His prognosis, though, is unclear at this stage, they say. We ask for privacy for him and his family at this time. The statement continued. Our thoughts are with Graham and his family. Phil Mickelson, he'll be asked a few questions, certainly, following his 3-month self-imposed break from the game, following the fallout from those derogatory comments that he made about the Saudi-backed breakaway tour that he is due to take part in.
So we're well aware of the challenge. They've got world-class players, world-class operators in every position. I've spoke many times about my respect for the coach and the coaching staff there. But you either fear that or you put your shoulders back and you try and take it on.
How City will play their games, but before they are played, I think we should not add on points. We don't do that, and I'm pretty sure City is not doing that. So, and as far as not reachable anymore, why should we stop?
Should say something, but Borussia Dortmund and Man City told me that it's not allowed me to say anything until the deal is completely done.
Sounds like it's done to me. Next month, Scotland and Ukraine will play of Ukraine, and their players continue to prepare against the backdrop of the ongoing war in their country. Our sports news reporter, Chris McLaughlin, has travelled to the team's training camp in Slovenia.
It's a nation fighting for its very... Preparing for a World Cup qualifier against Scotland next month. A fixture that just a few weeks ago seemed almost impossible. This group of players were always determined the game would go ahead. For match fitness here at the Slovenian National Training Centre.
Every day, for me, for guys, we receive the messages from our soldiers, and because a lot of soldiers...
They saw how people lost their homes, and even more lost their close relatives. So yeah, the story with everybody and what they say now, for example, the best.
Parcels a week, the year after 200, then 2,000, and we do over 500,000 orders this year. We offer high-quality regional products that are typically not available for the retail market. Ordinary do-it-yourself what you do. And that is actually a great link to our partnership with DHL, offering Go Green solutions. I think nowadays as a company, you need to be purpose-driven. You need to have a strong reason why.
Join me, James Wong, for Follow the Food on BBC World News.
History and accessibility can sometimes feel like they're at odds with each other. I love a historical site as much as the...
That's a bit of a mission.
I'm making my way up to the Acropolis, which in Greek means high city, which doesn't look nor sound very wheelchair friendly.
So before, loads of steep ramps before you came to any sort of accessible pathway. But since then, things have changed.
The Acropolis is Greece's #1 tourist attraction, and pre-pandemic, over 3.4...
Why the ancient Greeks were so fit. You have to be a god to get up this ramp. Let's do it! Which way am I going? This way? Thank you. Minute hike up some stairs to get to the Acropolis. Those are the stairs I'm talking about. Wow, I'd never make it up there. Hello.
But help is at hand. All I have to do is catch my breath and...
This is just... I mean, this is an extra part of the trip. This is a part that only we get. All the other good old-fashioned two-leggers have to go up the stairs.
The Acropolis has a long history, and over its time it's been used as a fortress, a mosque, and it's even been blown up. But its headliner has got to be the Parthenon, a temple dedicated to make the site even more accessible with the installation of further paths. I, for one, think this attraction is setting a good example to historic monuments throughout the world. And I'm really happy that
The Travel Show, sponsored by Turkish Airlines.
Continue over Sri Lanka's growing economic crisis. We'll bring you the latest from the capital, Colombo. Ukraine's port city Odessa is hit by powerful missile strikes as President Zelensky warns Russia's naval blockade is threatening global food supplies. Welcome back to the programme. Troops and police are on the streets of Sri Lanka to enforce a nationwide curfew.
These buses carrying government supporters attacked by opposition protesters after the news spread that Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa had resigned. The protesters defying a curfew and setting fire to opposition MP, and hundreds have been injured. The opposition blames the government for what has happened.
Everyone in this government, including President Attack, it was an act of state terrorism and political terrorism. The Rajapaksas must be held responsible.
Prime Minister Rajapaksa announced his resignation in a tweet in the midst of the protests at his government's handling of the ex-Prime Minister to also step down. Richard Galpin, BBC News.
Now, anti-government protesters blame President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's administration for Sri Lanka's economic crisis.
Irrespective of where you live in this country, is the economic crisis, the shortage of fuel, of gas to cook, of food as well, that is resultant also of this a year, and some that date back 10 years. For example, we have farmers all over the country asking this government for accountability for a disastrous policy that they put in place last year to ban the use of chemical fertilizers that saw
Gotabaya steps down, Rajapaksa, and if there is change, things will also change.
I think that politicians across parties and across the spectrum are going to have to do a lot to convince we don't want to replace the Rajapaksas with another, familiar faces who have also not delivered on promises for years. And they want to see either a massive overhaul in who is elected or who stands for election.
But in general, on a day-to-day basis, just talk our audience through how difficult life has become because of this economic crisis for ordinary Sri Lankans.
Right. I mean, it starts with something that we've been saying. At the same time, we have power cuts that at one point ranged up to 13 hours a day. You were literally in the dark for 13 hours a day, unable, and corresponding losses of signal. So you were not able to do work for those who were working from home. As a result,
Sarah from Watchdog Sri Lanka speaking to me a little earlier. Now, in Ukraine, officials say at least 100 civilians are still sheltering beneath the Azov-style steelworks in Mariupol. They say the plant is under attack by Russia and that more than 1,000 Ukrainian soldiers remain at the site. Russia has made small gains in Donbass in the east, but at a heavy cost. And in the north, the Ukrainians have been counterattacking.
for a transition period, and Hungary rejecting the proposal as unacceptable. For more, now I'm joined by Balázs Hidavegi. He's a member of the European Parliament representing Hungary's ruling Fidesz party. Thank you very much, sir, for joining Slovakia and the Czechs. You have completely rejected this plan. Tell us why. Why haven't you asked for some kind of exemption or for more time?
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you for the call. Germany, these countries are not in a position to suddenly just cut completely the import of Russian oil. We cannot wreak havoc in entire industries and stop the functioning of businesses and put millions of people.
To be a phased out approach, so we're talking end of the year, really, if you start to phase it out slowly.
Well, that's very short time. When you have a country that is almost completely dependent on...
Tens of billions of dollars have now made its way into Russian coffers, supporting, fueling and funding this conflict, the bloodshed in Ukraine, as a result of this strategy of Europe, where it has become completely dependent on Russia.
And Croatia, which has access to the Adriatic Sea, which has, for instance, access to other sources, and that's an investment for the future. But more time is needed for these countries to make that transfer, and you cannot. But we're standing open to negotiations.
But what then, in your opinion, needs to be done when the bombs continue over Ukraine, when entire communities have been decimated and people continue to be killed? We're all seeing the...
My country has welcomed over 700,000 refugees just from Ukraine over the past few weeks. We're also doing the utmost we can to help the peace go ahead. But we cannot destroy our economies and put to diversify our energy dependence and energy sources. As I have said before, we're making steps to do that. But you cannot force such a set of sanctions on the entire European Union. And it will not stop, by the way, the Russian aggression against etc. But this is a long-term process. It cannot be done just because of this war situation right away. You cannot just change entire economies like that. Because if you do that, you're doing havoc in entire industries and you hurt yourself more than...
To the market and assist the Europeans.
Well, they haven't really formally offered anything yet, but I think that's the right way forward. That's why I said we need negotiations, and we stand completely ready to have those negotiations within that. And I think Brussels and the European Union should play an active and proactive part in all that. But again, this cannot be done overnight. This cannot be done forcefully, because then you're hurting yourself more than the one you want to hurt.
Parliament on doctor's advice.
One person can cause an effect. One person in HR can...
Aligns with nature. She is warm, nurturing and loving. B-Mark mustard oil has always followed in nature's footsteps, extracting mustard oil using completely natural methods, focusing only on purity and quality and leaving the rest to nature. Because
MP and talk show host, I've been speaking with him about many aspects of the Russian war with Ukraine. But I started by asking him how Moscow would view a move by Finland to join the alliance. Have a listen.
People in Finland can do whatever they want, but the borders. We're not gonna go into the war with Finland, of course, but we will protect our border more and more, borders more and more, and we will not
see what Russia has done to Ukraine and its aggression there and targeting of civilians. Then we have no choice but to protect our own sovereignty and our own nation and have a security guarantee.
People in Finland will make. And of course, it's going to be a threat for us, and we're going to do something with that. But in our borders, not in Finland, of course. We have long relations.
Ukraine. Why can't Ukraine make that choice to be part of NATO or not?
Finland never was a threat for Russia. In modern history, of course, Finland did some steps to grab our territory. The completely another situation with Ukraine.
I was in Mariupol several years ago, and frankly, people were of hundreds of thousands of civilians targeted in Mariupol, of the situation in Bucha. How would you respond? What would you say to those civilians in places like Mariupol who don't understand why Russia is targeting them?
They have used civilian people like a life shield. For 2 months, they was cover their lives by civilians, by people from Mariupol. One in Russia, no one in Ukraine. But now Ukraine is a threat for Russia. It's a direct threat for Russian state, if you want.
To these Ukrainian people who, as you say, are angry and horrified.
Yalda, you live in Western and Ukrainian myths. Just give me by a Russian soldier, but you can't give me the name. Just one name, Yalda.
I mean, Human Rights Watch has done detailed, and as have international lawyers they're investigating. Her identity claimed she was raped and then returned home to find her husband had been shot dead. There are plenty more accounts in Yugita's report, which you can find at bbc.com/news.
Now, this is 1986. Back then, the Marcos family were ousted from the presidential palace. But more than 30 years on, they look set to return.
His platforms will be actualized, because he will.
But his chief opponent, Leni Robredo, has yet to concede. She's calling for a probe into how long delays caused by counting machine failures were then followed by rapid election results.
Not only regret, but clear frustration is what our ranks feel.
And here's what that frustration looks like.
This is a protest that's taking place at the moment outside Komolek.
But it's clear this election is already causing divisions. Howard Johnson, BBC News, Manila.
Back here in the UK, Prince Charles has officially opened.
Hello again. We've got a severe heat wave across Pakistan and northwest India building this week. Temperatures in Pakistan could reach 50 degrees on a number of the days later this week. Meanwhile, the satellite pitch is working in a westward direction. It may well make landfall in Andhra Pradesh Wednesday morning, or could just stay offshore and start recurving northwards through the Bay of Bengal. Either way, Andhra Pradesh on Wednesday will see some very heavy rain, 100 to 200 millimetres, reaching West Bengal, and some heavy downpours on the way to Bangladesh later in the week. Meanwhile, in Karachi, it does get quite hot here with temperatures climbing over the next few days, but it'll be elsewhere in Sindh province that we could see temperatures hit the 50 degrees.
कभी परछाई बनके कभी विश्वास बनके दिल में साहस का एहसास बनके
56 से आज तक LIC हर पल आपके साथ.
Nature, all-powerful and uncompromising, a force over which mankind has no control. But when one aligns with
5 years after being battered by Hurricane Maria, Puerto Rico is still fighting to rebuild its electricity grid. Fossil-fueled corporate interests say they should do the job, but local leaders here say the sun is
God's on BBC World News.
On Monday, violence between supporters and opponents of the government killed at least 7 people. A nationwide curfew is in place. Authorities in the southern Ukrainian city of Odessa say aircraft dropped 7 missiles on a shopping centre and a warehouse. Prince Charles has officially opened the new session of the British Parliament and for the first time read the Queen's speech on her behalf. And they're all your latest updates.
Cosmos,
But in practical terms, where is our fascination with space taking us? It's more than 5 decades since the first moon landing, and NASA is struggling to keep its promise to make a return journey, and by way of preparations of money and geopolitics undermining NASA's mission. Jim Green in Silver Spring, Maryland. Welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you so much, Stephen. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it is a real pleasure to have you on the show. And you have
golden eras, and it's a matter of perspective. You know, the program has not only humans that explore beyond Earth's boundaries, but also we have missions that study the universe or move out.
Truly 100% captured when NASA is sending human beings to explore rock, celestial bodies beyond our own. Isn't that the truth?
Well, of course, building them, launching them, landing them, or having them rove, and we get to know them and their idiosyncrasies really well. And we cry when they die. So in a way, you know, humanity has been exploring the universe and answering some of the top questions we want to know. Are we alone? And how did we get here?
Does the fact that the funding coming from the federal government too have lost interest or faith in NASA's mission?
I don't look at it that way. Indeed, we had a large amount of our budget going into building the infrastructure. It's support of NASA, allowing us to continue on at a steady rate, making some spectacular discoveries.
Well, you, Jim, clearly are an optimist, because what you appear to be avoiding there is the issue of about their enthusiasm for NASA's mission to take human beings back to the moon as a prelude then to pushing on to a crewed expedition to Mars. They think that is something the public would like and is enthusiastic about. But
engineers and scientists work closely together, building instruments and assembling things during a time when, you know, social distancing and all the other problems that we've had. So there has been some effect to what we could get, go around the moon in a figure-8 pattern and return. Now that won't be crewed. But indeed, we brought it out to the pad. It's been assembled. We've found some leaks. We brought it back into the vehicle assembly build.
Realism rather than hope. Donald Trump, when he was still in office, he said that as far as he was concerned, US citizens had to be on the surface of Mars by 2033. All the experts
Resources are available. They do the science and the analysis necessary to support human exploration to follow. We want to be able to do it safely. Therefore, we don't want any surprises. And it's really through that planet.
Can be, I think this is the right word, terraformed. You can adapt the atmosphere around Mars. You can use magnetic shields to place between Mars and the sun to somehow transform Mars into a place that is even hundreds of billions of dollars to make that come true, surely trillions of dollars, inconceivable amounts of resource, time and money. What on earth is the point of going down that track?
Oh, it's done nothing but change. And what we're moving into is a rapid change period. What happened to climate on Mars? Mars also went through a rapid climate change. It was a blue planet early.
The US, the commentator on space science, Neil deGrasse Tyson, and he said to me, you've got to understand that the idea that we went to the moon because just the unquenchable curiosity of the human being, the militarization of the low orbit space, where Russia and China already developing technologies for satellites that can knock out other satellites, where they're trying to establish, it seems, the notion of...
As we know it, and therefore, we're going to have to deal with these issues well into the future.
Did you, when Donald Trump developed this notion of a Space Force, which I noticed Joe Biden hasn't abandoned, the Space Force project?
NASA is not the only organization in the federal government that works in the space realm, okay? And many different parts of the Department of Defense were working in that. The Space Force gathered those much spacecraft that sometimes die in orbit, causing what we would call orbital debris that would be of danger to working satellites, that we need to track all those. We need to know where they are. We need to together, and I think functioning very well.
Right. The militarization of space and the notion that the United States needs to develop its capabilities there has led the US to ban all space cooperation with China. But it did not and has not banned space cooperation with Russia. Now, you've been one of NASA's leaders over the last decade or two or three. Do you acknowledge that the increased dependency, because they were so angry about the imposition of American sanctions on Russia as a result of the invasion of Ukraine, the Russians have told NASA that future cooperation will not happen as long as those sanctions remain in place. So you guys...
We have 2 Russians on space station right now. You know, there's no move afoot in the NASA position not to continue that relationship because they are members of the crew. NASA needs to speak as one organization. And our approach is one of a peaceful means. And our interaction.
They can be realistic in the geopolitical world that we see right now is another matter. And it's not just about state actors, is it? It's also about privateers. It's about the billionaires like Elon Musk.
You know, 15 years ago, we started that whole concept of doing more commercial activities. You know, we funded them as startups. Of course, we want them to come in and be part of...
What is being achieved scientifically? Nothing at all. You're just making space the domain of the super rich.
You know, this conversation perhaps is much like what happened in the 30s when Lindbergh crossed the Atlantic, you know, in 50 minutes. And it's because one orbit around the Earth is 90 minutes long. Period. Okay. So you have to recognize what's happening is the start of, I think, commercializing. We will work together as a world.
Right. But we Jim, have been talking about NASA's clarity of purpose and mission going forward. And it's going to get confused, isn't it, when the privateers, and these guys are super wealthy and super extraordinarily complicated and difficult.
It does, but it's always been that way. What you haven't recognized is every time we put out a request for proposal, obtain those, make a selection, many times...
You've spent a lot of time looking at. In particular, I'm interested in your work on what are called solar flares and the extraordinary electromagnetic implications that these flares coming from the sun have. Is it true to say that a solar...
That we haven't seen the most intense sun in the space age that we could have. We've gone back in the past and recognized there's been enormous coronal mass ejections where huge pieces of the upper atmosphere producing additional currents in our power grid that cannot possibly keep them going, and therefore they burn up transformers and you lose them.
We'd only have a few hours to turn everything off before it got blown out by such
going on. They'll take a lower latitude route.
A final thought. You left your chief scientist job at NASA before it was confirmed that there is indeed any form of life beyond.
You have to realize in the 40 years I've seen in the space industry, we didn't understand superstorms. Now we do. We didn't understand much about dark energy, dark matter. Now we do, and we're on it. And we also didn't recognize frozen form, vapor form. Those are important conditions, we believe, for life. And we're finding planets that have conditions where life may arise. Now with Webb, our next big telescope, James,
Jim Green, I feel like our conversation is only really just starting rather than ending, but sadly, we're totally out of time. So for now, thank you very much for being on Hard Talk.
Stephen, thank you very much.
A force over which mankind has no control. But when one aligns with nature, she is warm, nurturing, and loving. B-Mark mustard oil has always followed in nature's footsteps, extracting mustard oil using completely natural methods, focusing only on
$1956 से आज तक LIC हर पल आपके साथ।
वही स्वाद, नया अंदाज, अमूल चीज, ये मेरा चीज है।
The consequences of my decision was not going to Australia, and I was prepared not to go.
I have to work twice as hard for half as much, and it's been the way that my whole career has been.
I bring that part of my Asian culture with me into everything I do.
They can kill us, and they will also die. I can't understand for what.
When big names talk, they talk to the BBC.
He's been called the Trump of the tropics, with views many see. So I've come to Brazil to find out why.
This is BBC World News. I'm Matthew Amrodiwala. On today's Global, anti-government protesters defy a nationwide curfew in Sri Lanka, demanding the president steps down. With missile strikes.
Last night when we were here, it was difficult to see the full extent of the damage, but this morning you can. The rocket has completely ripped into the back of the shopping centre here. You can see it's completely folded.
And I'm Lise Doucette in Ukraine, where Russia continues.
Left at least 7 people dead and 200 injured. In the past month, the country has been gripped by escalating demonstrations over soaring prices and power cuts. On Monday, the Prime Minister, Mahinda Rajapaksa, resigned in an effort to quell the unrest.
The protesters defying a curfew and setting fire to vehicles and businesses belonging to members of the ruling party. This is what remains of a house owned by a cabinet minister.
Everyone in this government, including President Rajapaksa and Prime Minister Rajapaksa, must be held responsible for this inhumane attack. This was a planned, thought-out attack. It was an act of state terrorism.
In a tweet in the midst of the protests at his government's handling of the economic crisis. But it's not quelled the violence. Demonstrators tried to storm the Prime Minister's official residence when he was inside the building, calling for President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, younger brother of the ex-Prime Minister, to also step down. Richard Galpin, BBC News.
Well, let's talk live now to Dr. Harini Amaraya Suraya, an MP.
Local council members to his official residence, where he gave a very defiant speech saying that he was prepared to make any sacrifice for the sake of the country, and so also saying that he was not a coward who ran away, walked out and attacked 2 protest sites that had been largely peaceful. That these protest sites have been in existence over a month and there has been no violence whatsoever. And these government thugs attacked both those sites. Is that the president has to step down, 2, that the prime minister has to step down, and 3rd, that they have to return the money that they stole. So that's more sort of a slogan against the corruption that this government and this the political stability is essential to address that the really dire economic crisis that we are facing. So in order to deal with the political crisis, we think it's essential that the president steps down and
more violence in the coming days.
We are fearful because although the 2 protest sites in Colombo are largely peaceful, the protests outside are beginning to become less and less managed gesture from the part of the government and a kind of an overall effort at diffusing the tension. Just now, we got a message saying the army and the police have been ordered to shoot on sight anyone who's caught damaging property.
And Ukrainian soldiers remain also at the site. To the west of the country, one person was killed in missile strikes on the port of Odessa. So let's head to our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucet, who's in Dnipro for us. Lise, over to you.
This morning, it was the southern port city of Odessa, which was the target of several missile attacks by Russian forces. We understand it was hypersonic missiles which travel at about 5 times the speed of sound. Reports from
celebrated Victory Day, Odessa burned. This was one of the city's shopping centres incinerated after a missile strike. The Ukrainian authorities said that 7 missiles were launched at the city yesterday, killing 1 person and injuring 5 more. This morning,
food shortages. And over time, the situation could become frankly terrible. Politicians are already discussing the possible consequences of price crisis and famine in Africa and Asia. This is a direct
threat of war. Caroline Davis, BBC News, Odessa.
Well, ever since Russia's invasion began on February 24th, there's been acute concern that this conflict could spill across Ukraine's borders. And now there is heightened concern in Moldova on the west. The officials in Moldova have told the BBC that they're feared there could be a campaign of civil unrest that could draw Moldova. Moldova is also giving refuge to nearly 500,000 Ukrainian refugees, and that has drawn the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who is in Moldova today. Our correspondent Nick Beak reports from there.
The war in Ukraine on its doorstep, this former Soviet republic has applied to join the European Union. But some fear Russia has this country in its sights. Are you scared that you catch glimpses of the Russian troops who've been stationed here for 30 years, within the pro-Moscow breakaway territory of Transnistria? This was the moment masked men opened fire on its government building.
To the destabilization of the internal order.
But for Sergei, playing and selling his homemade instruments at the market, he's increasingly worried about what he's hearing from the Kremlin. Tread carefully as it tries to live in peace. Nick Beak, BBC News, Chisinau.
So day 76 of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and no part of Ukraine feels safe. And as we've been hearing, the neighbours are increasingly nervous too. That's all from us for now. Back to you in London.
Lise, thanks very much. Renowned author Andrei Kirkov on the pain, the loss and the resilience of Ukraine. His latest book is set in the Donbass region. That's next, here on Global.
Extracting mustard oil using completely natural methods, focusing only on purity and quality, and leaving the rest to nature. Because when we live in harmony with nature, life can be great.
The mustard specialist since 1933. Barso Cesar.
Ukraine, because the war in Ukraine has reset the world order and completely upended the day-to-day lives of millions of people. My next guest was born in Russia but has made his name writing internationally acclaimed books about Ukraine, where he lives with his family. War and invasion and all the brutality that followed.
It was a real shock because I expected some kind of escalation in Donbass. I understood that actually if Putin brought 150,000 soldiers and thousands of tanks, like the Second World War with carpet bombings of the cities, with murders of civilians, what happened near Kiev in Bucha and Gostomel in Ukraine actually makes me think only about Nazis in the Second World War.
And of course that is what has been referenced.
Every day more missiles are sent to Odessa and more explosions are heard there. So they understand that they can actually take Odessa if they do with Odessa the same that they did with Mariupol.
Your latest book, Grey Bees, that is region. And of course, he claims it's to protect people like you, Russian speakers. I mean, when you hear that, what do you think?
I'm appalled because actually most of the victims in Mariupol, in Chernihiv, in Kharkiv are Russian speakers. They are killed by, in the very beginning, I write in Russian. I was born in Russia. It's my mother tongue. I publish my books always in Russian and in Ukrainian translation. And now I feel ashamed of being Russian speaker because, because of Putin turning Russian language into a deadly weapon again.
In the Russian language, because it's been commented, you've been criticised for it in the past, but are you now reconsidering that?
I will still write my prose, not non-fiction, but prose in Russian, but I don't from Ukraine. So I mean, my language is my personal choice. It's my mother tongue, but I don't want sort of to bring more damage to Ukrainian culture by publishing my books in Russian. Writing nothing, I started writing articles and essays about the situation in Ukraine, about Russian-Ukrainian relationship, about the history of Russia and history of Ukraine, trying to actually share the knowledge that actually these two nations have two different, they don't need opposition, they don't need actually freedom of speech. But I mean, Ukrainians are the opposite. That's why, I mean, while Putin was president in Russia for 22 years, we had 5 presidents, and one of them was thrown out of the country and ended up in Moscow. So, I mean...
Acted and responded appropriately this time.
I am very grateful, actually, to Europe, to the States, to Britain for the solidarity for military and humanitarian aid. I mean, this was the proper response. I assume that there was some kind of...
It is a battle for survival for so many different individuals and families. Right at the start of this conflict, on the eve of war, you said that your family would stay. Is that what has happened? Have they stayed even now?
To talk about Ukraine, to take part in discussions, but I'm always coming back. So we are in Ukraine.
I hope you can still hear me. I've got about 30, 40 seconds left.
Yes.
How do you see this war ending?
Well, I can afterwards, and I can understand that 3 main groups which will be fighting for the power, for the control, are oligarchs, Russian generals, and FSB generals. So my prediction is that if the oligarchs win, the war will be stopped, because oligarchs don't need this war. About 2 other...
Hello again. We've got a severe heat wave across Pakistan and northwest India building this week. Temperatures in Pakistan could reach 50 degrees on a number of the days later this week. Meanwhile, the satellite picture centre of circulation is still actually quite a way out to sea, but the storm is working in a westward direction. It may well make landfall in Andhra Pradesh Wednesday morning, or could just stay offshore and start recurving northwards through the Bay of Bengal. Either way, Andhra Pradesh building. Now, we have already seen temperatures reach 48 degrees Celsius this week, but I think over the next couple of days we'll see those temperatures reach 50, perhaps peaking at around 51 degrees Celsius. This is extreme heat. It's very dangerous. Bringing some heavy downpours into Andhra Pradesh. The rain will spread northwards as well, reaching West Bengal, and some heavy downpours on the way to Bangladesh later in the week. Meanwhile, in Karachi, OK, it does get quite hot here with temperatures climbing over the next few days, but it'll be elsewhere in Sindh province that we could see temperatures hit the 50-degree mark.
Nature.
कभी परछाई बनके कभी विश्वास बनके दिल में साहस का एहसास बनके उम्मीदों को सच्चाई के रंग से
कल आपके साथ
On the Belarusian side, migrants started throwing rocks and bricks and branches towards the Polish forces.
A week of commemoration has now claimed at least 14 lives overnight. You had people rushing to their basements.
We break stories from more places than any other international news broadcaster. We are the leaders in global breaking news.
This is BBC World News. I'm Matthew Emery-Waller. On today's global, anti-government protesters defy a nationwide curfew in Sri Lanka, calling for the president to step down. And with missile strikes. The financial cost of the war, Ukraine's economy is expected to shrink 30% this year as Russia's contracts by 10%. Also on today's programme, protests and celebrations in as the next Philippines president. But elsewhere, protesters took to the streets claiming the election was unfair after nearly 2,000 counting machines malfunction, causing long delays and preventing some from voting. Our Philippines correspondent.
30 years on, they look set to return.
His platforms will be actualized because he will continue all his father's projects. The Duterte's Build, Build, Build program. If all those will be fulfilled, the whole country will get better. No one will struggle.
Marcos Jr. is calm. We should be calm too. Let us leave it to his administration. Unite. Let's all unite.
But his chief opponent, Leni Robredo, by rapid election results.
Alam kong hindi madaling tanggapin sa inyo.
I know it's not easy for you to accept the numbers that come up in the quick count. Not only regret, but clear frustration is what our ranks feel.
Bongbong Marcos pledged he would unite the country. But it's clear this election is already causing divisions. Howard Johnson, BBC News, Manila.
Now, those figures, according to the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Now, that in itself is a downgrade on its earlier forecast when it warned of a 20% slump. Meanwhile, the report predicts that Russia's economy will shrink by 10% this year and see
for 60% of GDP prior to the war. Electricity consumption, which is a good indicator of what's happening in the economy, is down by 40%. Between a third and a fifth, Ukraine will emerge from this war much poorer than before.
And how, I suppose it's very early days for us to start talking about reconstruction or indeed how they get the economy back up and running. But quite clearly, this also has...
Economic recovery was taking off in the regions around Ukraine, in the broadly defined European neighborhood. And the war worsened economic outlook for all but two countries for which we publish projections. Income levels only at some point late next year.
The EBRD. Now let's turn to the United States, where the Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has just been testifying in front of lawmakers on Capitol Hill. She had some
including abortion, helped lead to increased labor force participation.
Well, let's get the thoughts now of our North America business correspondent, Samira Hussein, who's live in New York for us. Samira, some strong words there from Janet Yellen.
Alongside the work of others, really outline just how much access to both contraceptive technologies and access to safe abortions really help propel women into the workforce, raised not in abject poverty. Now, unsurprisingly, those comments drew some ire from a lot of Republican lawmakers, some of whom actually left the hearing room. Others challenged Ms. Yellen, one even suggesting
could be a response. We saw the Fed raise rates. That might keep a lid on prices. But what can the White House do?
Look, just in the last few days, we've seen a dramatic increase in the price of petrol here in the United States. They try and do something to address the skyrocketing cost of living on everyday Americans. And so, according to the White House, President Biden will outline some specifics on how he plans to address that. But it's also going to be a list to try and get some more money to those that need it.
OK, I know you'll be watching that closely for us, Samira. Thank you for now, though. Samira saying there in New York. Matthew, that's it. Back to you.
Ben, thanks very much. Now, as promised, let's get more on the situation in Ukraine as ever.
Odessa is a beautiful city, really beautiful, iconic city from the past. It would be a tragedy if it gets the kind of treatment that Mariupol and other cities of the exports of grain and fertilizer go out to the world. I mean, you've just been talking about Sri Lanka and the riots there. There's a clear link with the shortages of food that are coming from.
For that country being blocked off from the Black Sea, but the international consequences that you were just touching upon.
Yeah, I mean, it's the start. It all feeds into the damage that's being done already.
His land bridge, the next few months, she said, could see more unpredictable and potentially escalatory trajectories. And their opinion is that Putin is likely to impose martial law potentially.
Well, I mean, they may have this on Russia, will start to take serious effect by December. And then we'll see if President Putin is as keen to continue with it.
Both sides that perhaps this is a war that is the long game. I mean, very interesting, Emmanuel Macron and Chancellor Scholz talking about the next wave of EU sanctions, particular focus on Hungary, which has been really clear that they plan to oppose any oil sanctions on Russia. I suppose that the danger is in a long-term conflict like this, that the longer it goes on and those Western sanctions increase, the hope for Putin is that the alliance frays.
I'm sure that's one of the factors in his thinking. In fact, you know, Hungary is not a really very important member of the EU, these kind of things. I'm sure.
So you think a workaround is the more likely out?
I'm absolutely certain. I think they'll just find a way of accepting Hungary. I mean, Hungary's President Orbán talks about the damage would be.
In a moment or two, we have the story of an Afghan boy who began his life living in a cave and became a news cameraman nearly 20 years later. That documentary, that film, has just won a BAFTA, and we'll talk live to the director.
से आज तक LIC हर पल आपके साथ।
BBC experts check the facts behind the stories making the headlines. Go to the BBC News website and reality check. Get the facts straight.
Live on the programme. You've been part of these protests for such a long time. Tell me why you've taken to the streets.
Thank you, Matthew. So as many of the Sri Lankans who are on the streets, we need to tell our politicians what we want. We need to tell the politicians and the world what's going on here. Our people don't need to suffer so much at the hands of a few demented.
Violence on the street that went on into the night. I've just mentioned just now in the introduction the new shoot on sight orders. Do you think that is likely to put protesters off from going on the streets? Will it put you off?
The riots really of yesterday is so uncharacteristic of what we as peaceful protesters have seen so far, and there's great suspicion that people were protesting peacefully, but a lot of instigated to create.
It's a difficult line. I'm going to try one more question because we know about foreign reserves.
The lines like early morning, and if at all, if you get any at all. So the same with LPG. That is used commonly in Sri Lanka for cooking, and there's electricity outages for at least 3 hours or more.
Documentary. My childhood, my country, 20 years in Afghanistan, tells the story of Mir Hussain, charting his journey from a boy of 8 living in a cave to the start of his career as a news cameraman in Kabul. Here's a little bit from the trailer. with BAFTA, and congratulations on that win. Just briefly tell me, I mean, what was that moment actually like?
Sure, I will, but I wonder if you have ever touched a BAFTA. You may
Do you know,
have, but it's very heavy.
And I'm unlikely to.
We were confident that it may make the film stand out is the uniqueness of the way the film is made. 20 years without no intervention of the director, just following the little boy to see what happens. And well, it started with the story of Afghanistan right after the fall of the Taliban first government, and at the time that Afghanistan had just become the darling of the West. 42 countries had intervened, and we followed the boy. It take us 20 years, and still, sadly, unfortunately, in a way, Afghanistan's back to square one. So
I'll
in
come
a
to
way,
that in a moment, but it could just give me an idea of what it was like, I mean, to be there, but also to see that sort of, the levels of change that you actually witnessed.
So each time that I, as a film director, or my co-director went there, we were faced with new surprises, because in rural areas, in absence of any sort of meaningful governance, people had to themselves find their way of life, the resilience and toughness of the people of Afghanistan against the very almost day-to-day challenges, from overcoming one challenge and bumping into another, but still standing firm and carrying on.
Does it feel like the country has...
From one extreme of fighting that had 300 killed a day before fall of the Kabul to the Taliban, has gone to another extreme. Well, that fighting has started, that 300 killed a day has started, but at a very high price, having all those 42 nations, the West, the whole Americans, will go back when they're leaving their jobs and finished building Afghanistan, nation building, building the country that they had come to build alongside Afghanistan, and leaving Afghanistan.
वही स्वाद, नया अंदाज, अमूल चीज, ये मेरा चीज है।
कल आज और कल में देशवास बनके, दिल में साहस का एहसास बनके, उम्मीदों को सच्चाई के रंग से सजाते हैं, मुश्किलें कोई हरदम साथ निभाते हैं, कल आए हर पल में रहते हैं।
1956 से आज तक LIC हर पल आपके साथ।
Can destroy us, but will answer. They can kill us, and they will also die. I can't understand for what.
When big names talk, they talk to the BBC.
It is hard to overstate just how important this vaccine could be. It was a privilege to be able to film the very first volunteers to receive one of the vaccines during the trials.
It is science we have to thank for giving.
Hello, I'm Ross Atkins with Outside Source. This is the extraordinary story of climate change. Vaccines, Europe, the Taliban, Ukraine. Symbolically, it's very important. Let's take this stage by stage. Here's the BBC's Stephen McDonald in Beijing. The West has stepped up sanctions.
Outside Source on BBC World News.
Also on today's programme, Russia targets the crucial port city of Odessa with missile strikes.
Last night when we were here, it was difficult to see the full extent of the damage, but this morning you can. The rocket has completely...
Curfew after violence between supporters and opponents of the government left at least 7 people dead and 200 injured. In the last hour, we've heard that the government has brought in new shoot-on-sight orders. On Monday, the Prime Minister, Mahinda Rajapaksa...
The aftermath of a night of violence here in the Sri Lankan capital, Colombo. These buses carrying government supporters attacked by opposition protesters after the news spread that Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa... There are reports that 7 people have been killed in the violence, including an opposition MP, and around 200 have been injured. The opposition blames the government for what has happened. The government's handling of the economic crisis, but it's not quelled the violence. Demonstrators tried to storm the Prime Minister's official residence when he was inside the building. A curfew across the island has now been extended to Wednesday. Many Sri Lankans are still calling for President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, younger brother of the ex-Prime Minister, to also step down. Richard Galpin, BBC News.
Amaraya Saraya, a member of the Sri Lankan Parliament for one of the opposition parties. I started by asking her who she thought was to blame for the violence.
Very clearly, the government is to blame, the Prime Minister of his cabinet and local council members to his official residence, where he gave a very defiant speech saying that he was prepared to make any sacrifice for the sake of the country, and so also attacked two protest sites that had been largely peaceful. That these protest sites have been in existence over a month and there has been no violence whatsoever. And these government thugs attacked both those sites while the police pretty much responsible for the initial attack.
And we're seeing the aftermath in pictures on our screens as you talk to us. Now, those protests have continued. Do you think they will continue until the president too resigns?
That they stole. So that's more sort of a slogan against the corruption that this government and this family in particular have been accused of. So yes, we think that without the president stepping down, the things are not. Political stability is essential to address the really dire economic crisis that we are facing. So in order to deal with the political crisis, we think it's essential that the president steps down, and also that the vulnerable communities and vulnerable who've been really, really hit by this.
A brief final thought. If that is not the avenue that's followed, how fearful are you of more violence in the coming days?
We are fearful because we really worry that this might escalate, that this kind of approach will simply escalate the violence rather than diffuse a really tense situation.
The latest there from Sri Lanka. Let's turn to the war in Ukraine. In Ukraine, one person was killed in missile strikes on the port city of Odessa. So let's head to our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, who's in Dnipro for us. Lise, over to you.
Yes, indeed. And here in Ukraine, there is a mall as well as a depot in the port of Odessa, the most important, the biggest port in all of Ukraine. It's a vital outlet for Ukraine to export its crops like grain and wheat and corn, crops that the...
Difficult to see the full extent of the damage, but this morning you can. The rocket has completely ripped into the back of the shopping centre here. You can see it's completely folded. There are still fires that the fire brigade here are trying to put out, and the electricity wires over on this side have been ripped away. Zelensky appealed again to end the war so that the port can reopen.
Without our agricultural exports, dozens of countries in different parts of the world are already on the brink of food shortages. And over time, the situation...
Missile strikes don't only destroy infrastructure, they shake lives. Even 300 metres from the strike, the force of the blast destroyed many of the windows in this block of flats. Katerina and her daughter, 2-year-old Irina, were inside.
The MP for the city, Alexei Goncharenko, welcome to BBC News. How worried are you that more and more Odessa is becoming a very strategic target for Russia?
From the that's why. And yesterday, during this parade on the Red Square in Moscow, Putin again mentioned Odessa, which is so cynically because after this he went with flowers to the monument. At the beginning, Russia was planning an attack on Odessa from 3 ways. First is on land, second from the occupied part of Moldova or Transnistria, and third by landing operation from the sea. Dangerous anymore for Odessa. So this landing operation, now it's much harder for them to make. So that's why I think Putin understood that he can't take Odessa. That's why he started to destroy it.
Angled by this invasion of Ukraine.
Absolutely, because I mean, almost everything, because Odessa was the main hub, the main port for agricultural export. And need to change the situation. There are statements of United Nations, of food security organizations, that this blockade of Black Sea is something very terrible from humanitarian point of view for the whole planet. And the whole planet, again, millions of people will suffer from this, not only in Ukraine. So that is in hands of the free world to unite now, to help Ukraine to stop this war as soon as possible, to put a real impact, including Ukraine.
Oleksiy Goncharenko, MP for Odessa, thank you very much for joining us. And as we've been on air, the air raid sirens have started to sound here. They sound continually in coverage from here and across Ukraine. But for now, back to you in London.
Lise, thanks again so much. Thank you. Now, still to come here on today's programme, 6 months after the COP26 climate summit, the UK's National Weather Service says it's currently 50-50.
3-Series Grand Limousine. Welcome to the grand side of thrill.
Nature, all-powerful and uncompromising, a force over which mankind has no control. But when one aligns with nature...
Welcome back to Global here on BBC World News. Our main stories here. Anti-government protesters defy a nationwide curfew in Sri Lanka, calling for the president to step down. The government has brought in new shoot-on-sight orders. Now, it is 6 months since world leaders gathered in Glasgow for the COP26 climate summit. Now, the UK's National Weather Service says it's currently 50-50 whether the world will warm by 1.5 degrees Celsius in the next 5 years. Let's speak to Professor Adam Scaife. He's head of long-range prediction at the Met Office, one of the authors of this report. Professor, thank you so much for being here with us on the programme. So tell us more in terms of what you concluded here.
Logical organisation, and we make climate forecasts. These are a bit like weather forecasts, where we run the climate model out for 5 years. So the forecast is for 2022 to 2026. And the headline result is the change we've now accrued, plus the small fluctuations due to natural variability could take us over that threshold, 50-50.
How problematic is it to go over that threshold, and why, in your explanation, would it...
It shows that we're now so close that actually the small amount of natural variability can take us over. There are all sorts of impacts. It's well documented that, for example, globally, heat waves are more likely in certain seasons and certain regions. With the amount of climate change that we've accrued, we'll no doubt see new record temperatures and record rainfall in certain parts of the world.
What do you then think is the barest minimum that needs to be done to avoid that?
Emissions. We're talking about reducing emissions by the vast majority. So, way more than half, a very large reduction in emissions in a very few years in order to avoid that.
And how much are we going to have to rely on atmosphere? What do you think on areas like that as potentially being able to help here?
I mean, we need an array of different sources of green energy. That's not my particular specialism, I must say. But
Rooney accused Rebecca Vardy, the wife of Jamie Vardy, of leaking private information about her to the media. Rebecca Vardy denies being behind the leak and is suing Colin Rooney for libel. Our correspondent Colin Patterson has this report.
To the Sun newspaper. Once they were friends, cheering on England together from the stands at the 2016 Euros. But everything changed in October 2019 when Colleen Rooney did some online detective work to investigate who was... Did Colleen reveal that the one account she'd allowed to read them was Rebecca Vardy's. Each side has already spent more than £1 million on their legal fees over the last 18 months. Judges have pleaded with them to settle out of court as it makes no financial sense.
In Colombo, there's some of the aftermath, the damage from yesterday, but there have been more protests today with people on the streets demanding the resignation of the president. Yesterday we saw the Prime Minister offer his resignation, but those protesters
Cyclonic storm Asani. The cloud is all off-centre. The centre of circulation is still actually quite a way out to sea. But the storm is working in a westward direction. It may well make landfall in Andhra Pradesh Wednesday morning, or could just stay offshore and start recurving flooding. Now, in Pakistan, we've got the heat wave building. Now, we have already seen temperatures reach 48 degrees Celsius this week, but I think over the next couple of days, we'll see those temperatures reach 50, perhaps peaking at around 51 degrees Celsius. This Bengal and some heavy downpours on the way to Bangladesh later in the week. Meanwhile, in Karachi, OK, it does get quite hot here with temperatures climbing over the next few days, but it'll be elsewhere in Sindh province that we could see temperatures hit the 50-degree mark.
देश के हर पल कभी परछाई बनके कभी विश्वास बनके दिल में साहस का एहसास बनके उम्मीदों को सच्चाई के रंग से सजाते हैं मुश्किलात देश के हर पल में रहते हैं
1956 से आज तक LIC हर पल आपके साथ।
Nurturing and loving, P-Mark mustard oil has always followed in nature's footsteps, extracting mustard oil using completely natural methods, focusing only on purity and quality, and leaving the rest to nature. Because when we live in harmony with nature,
Amul butter.
Another Chinese container ship has just arrived here in Athens. China now owns most of this port. It's the fastest growing of its kind in Europe. But the
slaves here on the Caribbean island of Grenada. When the brutal slave trade was finally abolished, my ancestors got compensation. The slaves got nothing. Now there's a debate here about reparations. Join me, Laura Trevelyan, for Grenada, a journey to confront the past.
Authorities in the southern Ukrainian city of Odessa say aircraft dropped 7 missiles on a shopping centre and a warehouse. President Zelensky is warning Russia's naval blockade is disrupting global food supplies. Prince Charles has officially opened the new set.
From e-commerce, new developments and products to gadgets and games, and for everyone interested in the internet and
coming up this week.
If there's something strange in your neighbourhood, who are you going to call? Drone busters.
Also, Spot the Builder.
Is it the robot dog by any chance?
OK, Spencer, here's a question. Can tech make you a better rapper? I want to go bolder.
Sounds like it can, yes. And what's
in a backpack? This is amazing.
Hey, welcome back. And first up this week, we're going to be talking about drones, which gives us a perfect example to show off our shiny new base here in Glasgow.
Which is rather picturesque.
Yeah.
Not that drones
revolutionise a load of industries. From helping with search and rescues, mapping cities, giving information to fire crews after traffic accidents, the possibilities are endless. Flying a drone can be airports grounded flights for days. Chaos ensued.
Flights in and out of Gatwick, Britain's second busiest airport, have been suspended.
Flights were grounded after drones were spotted close to the runway.
Arrests eventually led. It's notoriously difficult to neutralise the threat of a dangerous drone. But one company in Washington, D.C. says it has an answer.
Software interface. So what we see is the drone localized with this yellow diamond on the map. Most drones use radio frequencies to fly the drone, and we can use that to localize that and tell you where it's at. Additionally, we implement some radar technology.
So that's us turning on the drone there?
Yeah, so before we even get the drone airborne, we're detecting it on the ground. We know where it's at, camera's looking for it, trying to find you guys.
How big a scale could you do this?
The beauty of the D-drone system is that we can...
This is D-Drone's solution. It looks like a gun, but it's actually a device that scrambles the signal of anything that uses radio frequencies to operate, including drones. It's so powerful that Ben here, by law...
RF signals in the air. After that, we can do the full GPS jamming, which will
eliminate almost any drone from the sky.
Drones have been used to try and assassinate world leaders. How would this be used in that kind of context?
Yeah, if by the time yes.
Such is the importance of drones on the battlefield that there are currently more than 600 of these anti-drone devices used in the US military.
Perspective, but it's also important that drones be able to fly and provide the people with the ability to go out there and help people, right? People that are injured, do some scouting, all that stuff that goes along with drones for good, even in the
remote and barren part of the world, Shetland, where an internet connection is a luxury. Situated at the top of Scotland in the middle of the North Sea, Shetland is exposed to some of the most extreme weather conditions in the... So here at Cairgorm, the teams are building an electricity converter station and substation. It'll connect Shetland to the national grid and allow wind farms to export energy south. It's not just manpower, but new technology.
A fibre optic connection that runs in the road just down the valley. We've then got a microwave link which takes that internet connection into the site. And then there's a fibre optic connection to each of the 5G masts. So what the 5G network does is provide a high-speed wireless internet connection.
They welcomed a new site inspector. The aim of the engineers is that Spot will be able to connect to the 5G network, and much of his work can be done remotely.
How useful has it been to have Spot on the site here?
Oh, it's excellent rates, but that's a wee bit high. High is just 5 mil, yeah.
So what are you going to do with this data now?
Well, just make reports and then hand it back to the engineers, and we'll work out a plan to try and solve these issues.
But Spot isn't running.
I have a few specialised SIM cards that can connect it, but while we're working on getting some modems in, which will convert the 5G into broadband, which will allow more devices to connect it.
But the concept of what might be possible on the 5G net will to be built next.
Before, especially on a site like this, we would either have to print off drawings or download things from the office. But now, if we have to look up a drawing, we can do it on the fly out on site.
So to try and get a competitive advantage on other countries in this space. Everyone I've spoken to about the 5G and the new tech that they get to work with is really excited about it. And from Spot the Dog to augmented reality,
BBC experts check the facts behind the stories making the headlines. Go to the BBC News website and app to answer any questions you have about the big stories of the day. Reality Check. Get the facts straight.
Date night. Old El Paso dinner kit.
For years, I've wanted to rap well, but I never got past the rhyming perfectly stage, or even being able to do it off the cuff. Doing it off the phone doesn't look that cool.
our planet Earth fits 1,000,000 times into...
Half as good as that lot. So, I've come to Abbey Road to meet Micah, who's part of a team who've created Brain Rap.
Conventionally, you know, as an artist, what you do is you spend the proverbial 10,000 hours.
Mind. It pairs with a laptop to combine your brain's output with what you say into the microphone.
I want to embrace the place where we interface.
The company claims the data from your brainwaves helps the system choose the best words based on your mood.
Is seen in a part of the switch with the truth as a done.
For an experienced rapper like Micah, the system allows him to be creative because he can focus on building a story instead of worrying about finding the right words.
The caveat of what's going on that will never be seen.
Humans, for example, we don't script most conversations in advance, but to start performing well, we need to stop thinking as much.
There's a part of the brain up front which is involved in conscious self-monitoring and self-censoring and self-reflection, self-conscious. They're getting in their way. They're thinking about so many things that they can't actually turn off their brain.
Speaking to a real-time rhyming dictionary does feel more fluid. So, am I really being creative, or just a mouthpiece for a machine?
It's a replacement to the art or the organicness.
With the headset planned for release in July for between $3,000 and $5,000, it's not exactly an impulse purchase. The software, however, will sell separately, surprised by my improvement. Whether this is due to skill or software, I'm not quite sure.
Like Kirk, I want to go bolder.
Hey.
I thought by now I would be wiser, but I'm just older.
Musicians embracing new technology has always resulted in amazing creative leaps. This concept...
She's good, isn't she?
Oh, she's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I tell you what, that's not the only outrageous musical behaviour going on this week, is it, Lara Lewington?
No, are you a raver? I don't know if I've actually asked that question.
Do I look like a raver?
To an illegal rave. I'm just going to find it. Hello.
Welcome to the rave.
First, it's time to get on a VR headset, some headphones for spatial audio, and a vibrating vest to feel the beat.
Some of my friends, they listen to pirate radio.
I don't know whether I'm expected to try and retune the radio. Yes, I was slightly ahead of the game. I can change the frequency by walking up and down.
Environments, and we try and seamlessly sort of take you through movement within the scene to different parts of the experience.
I'm on top of the record. And that happens from the very start when you imagine that you're inside the record, walking along the floor trying to tune a radio.
What we were looking for in terms of interaction, what the key for interaction is to find something that feels intuitive, that's something that maybe uses your whole body and you get it straight away.
Everyone's searching for the rave at once.
The events. Back in 1989, these events were unlicensed, and that wasn't because they were illegal, it's because the licensing laws at the time weren't around to stop people doing it.
Meanwhile, I've been looking for clues.
And there's the music. I've got bass in a backpack. This is amazing.
Backpack is called a sub-pack, and you wear it, and basically certain frequencies in the soundtrack respond to that, so it gives you a deep sort of kind of bass vibrations of trepidation. Like, I feel nervous because I'm going in, but also excited.
The police have found us. I can't believe I'm now wanting to run away from the police. Is that how I'm meant to feel?
We are sort of at the most sort of advanced that we've ever been. So yeah, we have the ability to walk around. That's 6 degrees of freedom. We have interactions. We have haptics, so we have wind blowing in your face. You, as the user, you don't know it's happening.
Did you just feel it?
Absolutely, not that it was exactly my scene. I did feel like I was living somebody else's life.
That's true. I mean, let's be honest, that is the closest either of us have ever been to a rave.
I think that's fair.
I mean, let's think, 1989.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather.
Which is around 24 degrees in Hong Kong. Remnants of Cyclone Asani will bring further heavy downpours, strong winds to the east coast of India. Heatwave conditions continue for the northwest of India and parts of Pakistan. It's a dry picture for much of South Africa on Wednesday. We've got temperatures of 9.
Luxurious, the most spacious, and supremely comfortable BMW 3 Series Grand Limousine. Welcome to the grand side of thrill.
This has been such a fast-moving story and was relentless. Some of the images I've seen in intensive care units, they will stay with me forever. The warning signs here couldn't be clearer. The NHS is now on the brink. There's been a wealth of information about the disease, about vaccines, about how the virus is transmitted. And it's my role as medical editor to put that clearly and succinctly for the audience. It is hard to overstate just how vaccines would be our route out of the pandemic. So it was a privilege to be able to film the very first volunteers to receive one of the vaccines during the trials. Ultimately, it is science we have to thank for giving us